Ladies and gentlemen, my position is summarized by the title of my talk. Specialization is for dodos. So dodo, as you probably know, is a small flightless bird that was highly adapted to live in only one small island, Mauritius, in the Indian Ocean. So it was a very specialized bird. It also tasted like chicken, which is why it's now extinct. I believe there are lots of interesting lessons that we can gain from the natural world. So here is an example of specialization that's actually useful. So if you go into the forest near Salt Lake City, you might encounter brown bears. They're adapted to live in temperate forests. If you go further up north towards the Arctic Circle, you come across polar bears. Now it turns out polar bears actually evolved from brown bears. How did that happen? Well, apparently a colony of brown bears got isolated somewhere north of the Arctic Circle. Some were lighter in fur than others, and they had an evolutionary advantage. And so over time, those bears ended up being white. And so this is an example of specialization that's actually successful. It was driven by the struggle for survival. Here's a different lesson, one from the great city that we're in, and that is Salt Lake City. So it is, of course, the heart of the Mormon religion. The Mormon religion started around 1830 in upstate New York, but between 1830 and 1978, Mormons, like polar bears, were mostly white. So one could say that the Mormon religion was a very specialized religion. But in 1978, the church elders had a divine revelation that it was okay to admit people of other races. And today, the Mormon religion is actually very diverse. It caters to people of all races. And so here is an example of generalization. In my opinion, this too was driven by the struggle for survival. Around 1978, a lot of Christian denominations started expanding into third world countries, and the Mormons realized, well, they needed to keep up with this, and so they became more general. So here's the main takeaway. The struggle for survival, in my opinion, can result in both specialization and generalization. Specialization is useful when there are mutually exclusive alternatives. If you're a bear caught above the Arctic Circle and you have a choice between being a white bear or a dead bear, well, you prefer to be a white bear. But if you can appeal to all communities, if you can adapt to diverse environments like human beings have, after all, well, then you can be the master of the world. So what are the lessons for programming languages? As my opponents have already said, specialized languages are essentially what we call domain-specific languages, or DSLs. And if you look at successful DSLs, it turns out they almost invariably evolve into general-purpose languages. And that's because they need to deal with diverse data types. They also need to grow in market share. So we heard about MATLAB earlier. There is absolutely nothing domain-specific today about MATLAB. It began as a domain-specific language with only dense matrices and vectors a long time ago, but pretty soon they realized they needed to deal with sparse matrices, objects, abstract data types, and so on and so forth. And today, MATLAB is really a general-purpose programming language. It was inspired by an array language called APL. How many of you have heard of APL? Everybody above 40. Okay. APL is a dead language, so it is the dodo of array languages because it never expanded into anything more general. SQL, similarly, the focus was on structured data and relations. Today, SQL is evolving to deal with unstructured data. Erlang began as a way of writing telephony applications. Today, it has evolved into a general functional language. And so you can see a trend over here. You either evolve into a general-purpose language to deal with heterogeneity of data, or you become a dodo. There are two claims that I often see that are made for DSLs. One is productivity, the other is performance. So the productivity argument is that programmers can code with domain abstractions, so they become more productive, relations, groups, fields, etc. The second claim is performance. So compilers for DSLs, they say, can use domain-specific information in order to optimize programs. So optimization in SQL is given as an example. But there's an easy counterpoint, which is that both of these things can be implemented today in general-purpose languages. For abstractions, really all you need are abstract data types. To do the optimizations, you need semantic information about the methods, and there are technologies that exist for doing these kinds of optimizations now in general purpose languages. So you don't really need to go to a DSL to get these advantages. I have anecdotal evidence over here. Graph analytics is a very hot area. There are lots and lots of DSLs that have been proposed. GraphLab, PowerGraph, Ligra, Socialite, and so on. We have a different way of doing it, a general purpose programming model that we call Galois, implemented in sequential C++. Now, hearing our opponents, you would think that GraphLab, PowerGraph, and so on must be a lot more efficient. It must be a lot better at running these applications than Galois programs. But the chart on the right, as you can see, shows you that a typical GraphLab program runs roughly 10 to 1,000 times slower than the same problem solved in Galois. And that's because it has a very restricted programming model, whereas we have a general purpose programming model. So this is evidence in our favor, I believe. In summary, ladies and gentlemen, you have a very critical choice to make in a few minutes. You can either vote for generalization. That is the story of the human race. We started as pond slime about 4.5 billion years ago, but today we've evolved and we've now generalized ourselves to be the masters of the world by adapting to all environments as opposed to specializing ourselves in the pond where we started off many years ago. And so, in the same way, I think generalization is the story of America. We got started at Plymouth Rock. Today we've generalized ourselves to the entire continent. And so to be opposed to generalization is to be opposed to truth, justice, baseball games, hot dogs, Dallas Cowboys, cheerleaders. I don't think we will go that route. We do have a few people over here who believe in specialization. That is the low road, that is the road taken by North Korean dodos. Thank you.